But I'm going to start off with requests people made last week. And I'm going to see if I can bring in a few other little pieces of requests in the back of my head. And we started off with the place in Buddhism of faith, devotion and devotional practices. And those of you who've known me a long time know that I don't really encourage such devotional practices too much. Certainly that in my early years I started those devotional practices, lots of bowing and chanting. But later on, as you become a monk, you want to actually to go a little bit deeper than the externals. Yeah, these things have their place. And to show you how devoted I was when I was about to become a monk, I was still staying in London, just waiting for, I went to the Thai temple. Many of you know the reason I decided to become a monk in the Thai tradition was I went to all the different monks who were teaching in London at the time. There were Tibetan monks, there were Zen monks, there were Sri Lankan monks, there were Thai monks, there were Burmese monks, Chinese monks, and it was the Thai monks who smiled the most. And that's why I decided to become a monk in the Thai tradition. It's simple, just logic, reason. If you're going to become a monk and you want a teacher, look at a teacher who has obviously got something, and you can't tell just by what they say. Many people can say wise words, but see how they behave. See if they really are happy. See if they really have let go of a lot of difficulties and problems and suffering in life. And from that time on, I've advised many people here and other places, please, never be a disciple of a miserable teacher. If they can't fix up their own happiness, they can't fix up yours. So I used to go to the Thai temple, and I was very devoted. One of the most devoted members of that group. Even if I was living in Devon, I'd get on a motorbike and travel up there for the major ceremonies, just for the day, and go back in the evening. I remember just as I was just waiting for the abbot to come back to take me to Thailand, because he was visiting the United States, I go to that temple every morning, just about 5:30, so I could actually join in the morning chanting. I remember on several occasions, I used to go every morning. I'd be knocking on the door, waking the monks up. And when they opened the door and saw it was me, I could read their minds. Oh, it's not him again. If it wasn't for him, we could have slept in the morning. I was really devoted. And so I learnt all that chanting. And of course did all those rites and rituals, which were very important for me. But again, later on, you found there was something much more important than just the rituals. And to understand what I mean, it's an old story, but it's the best story which I can give you. And of course, many of you have heard these stories many times, but it's a great story, the story of the Marine in Guantanamo Bay flushing a copy of the Holy Quran down the toilet. Many, many years ago, hit the newspapers all over the world. And on that particular occasion, there was a man from the West Australian who was doing an article, here in Perth, and he was calling up every religious leader in this city, asking them the same question. And asked the Archbishop, the Anglican Archbishop, if somebody took a copy of the Bible and flushed it down the toilet in front of you, what would you do? When he asked me if someone took a holy Buddhist book and flushed it down your toilet, what would you do, Ajahn Brahm? Fortunately, I was very sharp, alert, and I said, sir, if someone flushed a Buddhist holy book down my toilet straight away, I'd call a plumber, because I'd have to use that toilet afterwards. But the most important, you know what he said? He said, that's the first sensible answer I've got from any religious leader. Because religious leaders, we should be the hardest to offend of all the human beings in this world. We should be the most difficult to make angry. So that's what I was saying. So I said, I'd call a plumber. But then I made an important point, and this is about devotional practices. I said to him, look, you can flush as many Buddhist holy books down the toilet as you want. You can actually blow up as many Buddha statues as you want. You can burn down the Buddhist temples. You can kill the monks and the nuns. But I would never, ever allow anyone to destroy peace, forgiveness, compassion, truth. I won't allow you to flush that down any toilet. And he got this sort of idea. In this teaching over here, we make a huge distinction between what we call the container and the contents. The books are containers. What do they contain? What's their essence inside? You see there, and even if it's in a Quran, it probably says, have mercy, forgive, let go, be kind, be compassionate. Certainly says that in the Buddhist texts. Blowing up a Buddha statue. What's a Buddha statue here for? To tell you how to be peaceful, to forgive, to let go, to be kind. So it's the contents which are most important, not the containers. And so that's why in Buddhism so often the rituals, sometimes the devotion, should be very careful that we're not devoted to the containers, that we're devoted to the contents, and we can always make that difference there. Which is why that, if ever you do come to do some chanting, some Buddhist chanting, great, it's a beautiful thing as long as you remember what the contents are. Learn what you're chanting, because some of those chants are very beautiful and very inspiring. These are great sermons of the Buddha, which when he chanted them or he spoke them, people would understand straight away what he said. And my goodness, they were powerful teachings. Sometimes they would enlighten people just because of the power of what he said. But they would understand it. It wouldn't be just words in a foreign language which sounded good and you just did it and thinking something might happen afterwards. No, you understood it. There was a contents to what you were doing. And so even these days, if ever I do any chanting, because I know Pali, I've learnt it myself, it's not that hard to learn, I know exactly what those things mean. And incredibly powerful teachings. So even if you do bowing, I know what bowing means. What a Buddha statue is. You know what a Buddha is. You sort of understood it through the practice of meditation. The word Buddha actually means not an enlightened one, but an awakened one. So play around with that word in your head, an awakened one. What that really means is that most people are asleep. And you understand what this really means if ever you do a little bit of meditation, because sometimes we get into some meditation states and we feel very clear. We can think straight, we can see more, we can understand more deeply. It literally is awakening. And because we've been asleep ever since we were born, and we're used to this sort of dull state where the mind is so restless and it's not powerful and it's not sharp, because we're used to this, we just don't know it anymore. And that's why we do encourage people to do things like meditation retreats where you can really wake up, really get a sharp mind, very, very clear, and see amazing things. You think, why can't my mind always be like this? It's because you work it too hard, you're too tired. And we get used to that tiredness, that mental tiredness, mostly thinking, worrying, being afraid, all that stuff which stops our mind resting and getting some energy and really being sharp and clear and awake. And of course, when you wake up, you see things clearly, you understand just why you get into so many difficulties and problems in life. You get insight, awake, insight, freedom, release, enlightenment. That's how it works. So Buddha's like the awakened one. So when I understand that, I thought, Ajahn Brahma, wake up. Get more alert, get more energy, get more sort of mindfulness coming along. And we have all these beautiful practices to do that. So when I worship a Buddha, I'm not just worshipping a statue. These are just statues, okay? And there's nothing sort of magical about the statue. All it is just what it reminds you of. It's the contents, not the containers. Which is brilliant because, traditionally in Buddhism, Buddhists have always been very peaceful. We have allowed other religions to destroy our temples and blow up our Buddha statues. We haven't got upset. Brilliant, well done, Buddhists. You passed the test. It's not about statues, it's not about temples, it's about just the essence of these things, the contents. So, encourage you. If you're going to be chanting, get the contents of it, the inspiration, the meaning, the power. That's more important. The chanting is just a vehicle for that. Which means if you keep chanting again and again and again and again, and my goodness, sometimes in Thailand we chant for 4 hours. That was just over the top. It was stupid. I'll tell you that. It just goes on for too long because you just get tired. It's not really it's missing the whole point. Once that inspiration comes, then just stay with that inspiration, that clarity. It's staying with all the other things we do, whether it's the say, the worship of a Bodhi tree or the circumambulation we do at Wesak. What are we doing that for? I know when we had a Wesak ceremony here in May, people were going around. It looks very beautiful, candlelight in the evening. But it's more than that. It's a silence which we ask people to keep on that occasion. Because the Buddha, the contents of that for me, awaken the silent one. And that's a brilliant sort of idea to get inside of. That's what Buddhism is, one of its most important contents, that inner silence, that peace, that stillness. Now to me, that really is sacred, that's holy. That's the contents of what we're doing here. And that's, being sort of like an abbot and trying to sort of have some control over just these centers here. You look at all the walls we have over here, nothing on them. No pictures, no signs. And I've fought battles to try and keep pictures off these walls. I fought battles to, not real battles, but I've stood my ground to keep like our meditation hall in Serpentine or the new one in our retreat center, free of all these things on the outside. Because you want to keep it simple, because only in simplicity do you really get stillness. When you make things complicated, what happens? It's too many things to do. So just having an empty wall. But how hard is that to do, to keep an empty wall? I've often noticed that as soon as when people would conquer these great mountains, they climb up Everest, they climb up Kilimanjaro, and what would they do? Stick a flag on it. Can't you leave mountains alone? And the flag is only the first thing they do to desecrate these beautiful empty places. After the flag comes the restaurant. Oh my goodness. You have these beautiful, and not even these days, not even restaurants nowadays, the TV tower on all these great hills. So can't we leave things alone? Can't we just have an empty wall? Can't we have a room in your house which is empty, which is silent, a shrine to simplicity and stillness and freedom? Look, I don't know how many things you've got in your room. When you go home, how easy is it to walk around your room? Or how often do you have to walk around things? Just, you can't even walk in a straight line. You have to zigzag around all the stuff you have in your room and your house. What have you got that there for? Certainly a house, okay, but in a religious place, it should be as empty as possible, as simple as possible, comfortable, but without the chandeliers of dripping, crystal, no gold, no beautiful marble, but keep it very, very simple and clean. Because it's a symbol. It's pointing to just the contents of this path. Simplicity, stillness, and freedom. So all the devotional objects are there for a purpose. Unfortunately, that people, Buddhism is a new religion coming to Australia, coming to the West, and people are just too believing. And this is really a strange thing to say to Westerners, because sometimes we always think the Westerners are very critical, but you can be a little bit even more critical and questioning. Because again, this is an important content of Buddhism. Question, ask, challenge. If you don't believe it, great, push it aside. One of the great teachings which I had from the time of the Buddha, when the Buddha gave a sermon and then he asked his right-hand monk, Sariputta, he's supposed to be the wisest monk next to the Buddha, and said, "Do you believe what I've just said, Sariputta?" And Sariputta said, "No, I don't believe it." Now that's a disciple contradicting his teacher. And what did the Buddha do? "Well done, Sariputta. I'd rather have someone who doesn't believe what I say, who questions it because haven't experienced it yet, than people just believing what I say just because I said it." So this was really the devotion which, when I saw that in Buddhism, I thought, that's what I'm really going to be devoted to. Just this method, not the teachings themselves, but actually the method of questioning, investigating, asking, being honest to oneself, honest to experience, honest to life. And that type of devotion, I saw that in one of the most beautiful teachings just before the Buddha passed away. When people knew the Buddha was about to die and they were giving him all these gifts. In those days it was traditional, the candles, flowers and incense gifts. It was a traditional way of showing your devotion to a Buddha. And the Buddha just told everybody off and said, that is not how you pay respect. That is not how you show devotion to a Buddha. He said, you show devotion to a Buddha by practicing all the teachings which he gave you. You show devotion by keeping precepts, by being kind, by being still, by being peaceful. It's that inner devotion, the real devotion, not just to the externals, not just to the containers, but to the contents of the path. And the reason he said that is because that really works. Yeah, you can bow down and be the most beautiful prostrator in the whole of Australia. We could do contests and have bowing contests and have a panel of monks and nuns just judging who does the best bow. You might see there's many different types of bows. The Tibetans do the full prostration. Sort of the Theravadas just do the 5-point prostration. Just the arms, the legs, or the whole calves, and the head. And I've seen some people do the prostrations. I think the experts on this are the Cambodians. They're supposed to bow 3 times. They sit there, that's 3, just with their hands. It's very quick, very simple, and it doesn't really take much time. But it doesn't really matter what they're doing. What's important is why you're doing it. What's actually inside your heart when you're doing these devotional practices. Yeah, do them. But also understand the contents of why you're doing this. I was trained by Ajahn Chah. Whenever I go into a room, I bow. When I leave, I bow. Even except for my toilet. When I go into my room, I bow. When I leave, I bow. You know what I do that for? It's not a ritual. So I can stop myself. So I'm not rushing. I have to pause and do this 5-point bow 3 times as I'm going in, as I'm leaving. It's a moment of stopping, a moment of mindfulness, a moment of just realizing rushing throughout my life is not really the way I'm going to get any peace or meaning. So when I understand why I'm doing it, it's a stopping, it's a slowing me down. It takes time to do these things. Now that's when you realize what the devotion is really there for, why it's there. And when you understand why that devotion is there, it's a training, an understanding, an opening of the mind, and a slowing down of the mind, an awakening. Then many of the rites and rituals now have meaning. You can devote yourself to that chanting, you can devote yourself to that bowing, you can devote yourself to offering things once you know the meaning. But before then, please restrain yourself from all this bowing. Restrain yourself from the chanting. Don't just do it because other people do it. Understand why, first of all. And then it has proper meaning. And then you are a real Buddhist. Even keeping precepts. I have to say this because where I grew up, Buddhism as a monk, Buddhism had been there for such a long time that people knew the rituals but they'd forgotten the meaning. And I think, people in Sri Lanka and Burma, some of it is the same over there. They do all this chanting, they do the bowing, they do the offering, but I not understand why. Why are we doing that for? It's just because your grandmother took you to the temple and you did that. And sometimes they ask me, just what are we doing this for? Unfortunately, as a monk, because I've asked the questions, I can actually tell them, and it has meaning. It means we have a path which is powerful, because a path without meaning, a path which is just a superstitious ritual, even though you may be devoted to it, where does it lead? Our devotion can go to so many different paths in our modern world, so many different religions, sects of religions, subsects of religions and no religions. And people show so much devotion to those particular paths. And you just got to be amazed just how devoted they can be, sometimes giving their life to such a cause. But then you ask them why. What are you doing that for? Is it really going to be beneficial to you and others? And I think many of you have seen some devotion to paths which actually can be quite harmful. And the very best, they don't really just give much benefit. So we want a devotion to something which is very, very useful. So all of the things you ever see in a Buddhist temple, before doing them, ask why. Get a good answer. There are good answers to all these rituals, which we do. You know, even just if it's just encouraging people. Even this chanting. Sometimes people, even some of my monks, say, what are you doing that chanting for? It doesn't work. I said, my goodness, it does work. I've seen it work. It is powerful. But it's only really powerful, this chanting, if it's coming from someone who's focusing their mind. It's not the chant. It's the person who's doing it has the power. It's just the power of the mind. You can focus your mind and have huge amounts of power. Never underestimate the power of the human mind when it's been well trained. So I've had some amazing effects with chanting. Look, people also ask for some psychic powers, if I could talk about some psychic powers this evening, because people love these sorts of stuff. You all know that last Sunday we had our entry to the range retreat down at Serpentine. And once again, it was a sunny day. Every time it seems we do this entry to the range day, even though it's in the height of winter, July, a nice sunny day. And I told people, look, it's going to be a sunny day, but when you guys all go, it's going to rain. And it hasn't stopped raining since last Sunday. And you might think, oh yeah, that's just coincidence. But how many times has it happened? And I must mention, look, one of the most, and many of you were here, one of the most amazing and obvious, really dinky-die, 100%, you can't sort of explain it otherwise, events was when we had our 30th anniversary of our Buddhist Society of Western Australia, and some of you were here when that happened. We had it in Supreme Court Gardens. It was a Sunday. It was the full moon day of May. Wesak Day, the holiest day in the Buddhist year. And when we started, our committee started talking, shall we do something on our 30th anniversary? It's just my nature. I'm a Leo. It's my birthday in a week or two's time. Leos like doing things big. If you're going to do it big. So they wanted actually to get the South Perth foreshore. So come off it, that's South Perth. Let's get the centre of town, Supreme Court Gardens, centre. Let's make it big. Forget about the money, we'll get it somewhere. So it was no expense spared. We got the Supreme Court Gardens, hired a huge amount of stuff, got that time Premier Jeff Gallup to come along, a couple of ambassadors, a big event. And you wouldn't believe just how much time and effort that took to organise. When I woke up in the morning, rain, heavy rain. The forecast, more rain. A storm warning. A heavy storm was to hit Perth about 7 p.m. when we're going to start our ceremony out in the open. Now, some of you were here. I remember one of my monks, he came up to me and said, Ajahn Brahm, you're being stupid. Look, I respect you, but it's raining. You just can't do it. 3 times the Premier's office called me. Are you cancelling? 3 times I say, of course not. Even when we went to the Supreme Court Gardens, it was pouring down with rain. And one of the fellows here, he knows who he is. He used to be a sailor. And he also took me aside. He'd been on ships all his life, and he said, look, I've seen the barometer. It's going down. A storm's coming. I know it's happening. Cancel. No. And I was the only one who just said, look, it's going to be okay. And of course, what happened? I'll never forget this. This lady is dead now, but I remember her coming in to the tent where I was rearranging the chairs, crying. You must come out. You must come out now. Not only had the rain stopped, but the clouds had parted, and you had the full moon out, dry and beautiful. We did the ceremony. Didn't rain. It was a slight sort of mini shower for about a minute, but it was dry. We did the ceremony. It was a great success, but not many people came. You know why? They told me afterwards, to the east, to the west, to the north, to the south, around the city of Perth, it was pouring down with rain. Trees were being uprooted. And they couldn't believe we did the ceremony. After we finished, it poured down with rain. The Supreme Court Gardens was under 2 inches of water the following morning in the newspapers. The freeway flooded and was closed. That's how heavy a rainstorm it was, and people here in Perth know what I'm talking about. We got an email from the person who hired the tents and other equipment. The email said, we don't know who this Ajahn Brahma is, but can you please ask him who's going to win the horse racing today? That's how impressed they were. There was Channel 31, it was the only news team there. I always remember the reporter coming around with me, filming, saying, this is weird, this is weird, this is weird. Now that's not superstition, because many of you were there and you saw that. So there is some power to these things. That's not superstition, but that's devotion. But devotion with some power behind it, not just empty. There is such a thing as faith, but it has to be supported by a very strong virtue, which gives you enormous power. Never underestimate the power of your precepts either. If you keep good precepts, 5 precepts, morality, virtue, and I don't just mean on the surface, I mean you really are keeping them at all times of the day. It becomes your nature to be kind, to be good, never to say a bad word to other people, never to be cruel, always to spend time with someone who really needs your help and being kind. It gives you enormous power. You use a bit of meditation as well, and you can do things. So I know from my experiences the amount of things which can happen if you have not just faith. Faith is not good enough. Devotion is not good enough. It has to be supported by incredibly strong virtue and a powerful mind trained in meditation. And then these things do happen. I've seen it, maybe some of you have seen these things happen. So I never underestimate those things. So devotional practice are brilliant, but you've got to do it properly. So what I'm devoted to, as a monk for many years, I'm devoted to what the Buddha taught, what my teacher Ajahn Chah taught me. I am devoted to virtue. Try very best to be kind, to be compassionate, not to sort of harm any living beings. If someone harms you, never to harm them back. If they say a bad thing, cheat you, cruel to you, misrepresent you, just be kind back. Because that's the strength of virtue, which makes you untouchable. It means you've got a strong basis for which you can make your mind still and peaceful and get enormous power. When you develop your meditation, which we really encourage over here, and you're devoted to stillness, not to thinking, not to sort of imagining things, but devoted to the still mind. It's amazing just how much power you can get and how much psychic power as well. When the mind is still, it builds up energy. Keep it still for long periods of time, you have huge amounts of energy. And you can feel that. You don't need to sort of believe that. After deep meditations, you get so strong, so powerful, so intense energy inside there, but it's still energy, it's peaceful energy, but powerful energy. I've called it in my book, superpower mindfulness. It is like a superpower, but it only comes from long periods of stillness. And that's actually what happens. And that gives you these powers, and that's what you become devoted to. So the real devotion should be to this path of Buddhism, to the practice of Buddhism, to the contents, not the containers. Use the containers. Don't throw the containers away, but remember just it's the contents, what's inside. It's not that you're chanting, it's why you're chanting, what it's doing to your mind, what it's doing to your body, what it's doing to your life. And whatever else which you do here, the generosity which you do here, why are you doing that? What's it actually doing to you when you give a donation to the nuns' monastery or the monks' monastery or to here? Why are you doing that? Where is it coming from? What are you doing? Is it really sort of making you feel good? Be devoted to that. If you understand the power of generosity, you understand the power of virtue, you understand the power of stillness, you understand the power of compassion. Somebody asked me this question. He said, look, if you're sort of compassionate and you're just doing it, you're making merit so you can have a good rebirth, isn't that being selfish? You're just doing it for yourself. You give a donation to the temple so you can pass your examinations. That's just doing business. And sometimes people think like that. They're doing these acts of virtue, generosity or whatever, trying to get something for themselves. But that is not what we do in Buddhism. In the spiritual path, it's not what we're trying to get. It's just what we can let go of. What we can be inspired with. What we can be peaceful with. Religion should never be a business. We don't do deals in Buddhism. You don't come along and say, Ajahn Brahm, I'll give you a donation as long as you can cure my cancer. Ajahn Brahm, I'll keep the 5 precepts for the next week as long as my wife can come back to me. Ajahn Brahm, this is not what Buddhism is all about, doing deals, not doing something to get something back in return. It's totally like learning how just to let go, to be able to do something just for the sake of doing it. Never thinking you're going to get something back. I spent my whole life doing things like that. Working really hard, not expecting anything back in return at all. Just giving. What do I get out of coming here on a Friday night and giving a talk? I just get tired, that's all. I could be in my cave just meditating, having a great time. But no, I do this because I really understand the power of just giving, letting go, not expecting anything back in return. That's real spirituality. Too often, people do things in life wanting something back. That's what you do at work. You go to work and you get paid afterwards. I forget what else. You go to university so you can get your degree. That's terrible in universities. I still remember this graffiti in Cambridge. I was in Cambridge from 1969 to 1972. In those days, graffiti, number one, you could read them. And number two, it would actually make a lot of sense. There were some very wise sayings on those walls. And I remember this one saying on the wall, it's outside the Cavendish physics laboratory, exams kill by degrees, it said. A nice witty saying, exam kills by degrees, because what it meant is people were studying, they were learning to get this reward, the degree at the end. And that killed much of the learning. We weren't learning for learning's sake, we weren't exploring just for the interest in finding out. We weren't sort of having this beautiful, encouraging this sense of the human to discover, to explore, to play, to find out. We're just getting something out of it at the end. And that spoilt a lot of education. It spoilt the human desire, the beautiful desire to discover, just for discovery's sake, not for anything else. There's so much of that we do, wanting something back in return. That is not spiritual, that is not holy, that is not the contents of Buddhism. The contents is we do just for the sake of doing it. We're kind just for the sake of being kind. Compassionate, not expecting anything back in return at all. And when people ask, what are you doing that for? You can't answer. I'm doing it just for the sake of doing it. Many of you, in the next 2.5 months, will actually be coming to our monks' monastery at Serpentine, our nuns' monastery at Gijiganath, to feed the monks and the nuns. And you ask, what are you doing that for? Why do you sort of get up early, make some food, travel all that way, and offer it to monks and nuns? Why? Sometimes you can't answer, but you just love doing it. You do it for the sake of doing it. You're kind, you're compassionate. And don't ever think, I was kind to her, but she never even said thank you. If you say that, you weren't kind to her. You were just doing this to get something, which is not kindness. Kindness, compassion is just giving, expecting nothing back in return. And if you can do that, you can understand this beautiful feeling, a peaceful feeling, the selfishness, the attachment, the grasping. You're overcoming that. You're just being a human being who does just for the sake of doing, not for the sake of getting. Our path is to share, not to own. Understanding that, you're getting closer to the contents of this Buddhism. So that's why I've said for so many years, in our monasteries, in our temples, even in this place, we don't have any donation boxes. We just have letting go boxes. Not donation boxes, letting go boxes, sharing boxes. Now, when we do things like this, what we actually feel when we don't want anything, we get this beautiful feeling of happiness and peace. It's like I'm moving on now from the devotional practices. People say if you do this, then you'll be happy in this life and you maybe go to heaven in another life. And so many religions talk about heaven and hells and ghost realms and other stuff like that. And do you really have to believe that? And anyone who comes along and says, I don't believe that, I say, well done. Just like I said, Sariputta disagreed with the Buddha. Well done, because you don't know it yet. You're allowed to disagree, because our job is to find out, to investigate, to see if we can know by ourselves. But eventually you get to understand what these heaven realms and hell realms really are. If you're kind, if you really are compassionate, how does that feel? Immediately you do that. If you're cruel and mean and selfish, how does that feel? A lot of time, if people were a little bit more mindful and reflectful about the immediate results of their actions and their speech, straight away would be a much kinder, more soft, more peaceful beings. There was this old story this was a Zen story of a woman who was always getting angry, and she went to her monk saying, can you please help me not get angry, because afterwards I create so much misery and upset to my friends and relations. I always get angry at them, and I don't want to get angry, but I can't stop myself. And the monk noticed that she was, very, very well-dressed and well sort of groomed woman. She was obviously very vain. She really cared about her appearance. So he said, all you need to do, madam, is carry around a mirror with you. Put it in your handbag. And the next time you get angry, take the mirror out and put it in front of your nose and have a look at yourself. And she was faithful enough, she did that. The next time she started shouting at somebody, she remembered to get the mirror out, she put it in front of her face. Ah! She was so shocked at what she looked like. She never realized she looked like that. Not all the makeup in the world can't make an angry woman look beautiful, let alone an angry man either. You look like monsters. And so she was so upset at what she looked like that from that time on she never got angry again. So the story went. I don't believe that for one moment. But it must have had a deeper meaning. And obviously that was how it was told to me. But again, I didn't want the container, I wanted the contents. What does that really mean? That was just meaning the mirror of mindfulness, like reflection. Next time you get angry, how do you feel? Hold a mirror of mindfulness up to your mind, and how do you feel inside? What's it like when you're angry at somebody? Your mind is like a monster. Your mind is like a crazy person. If you see that enough times, you won't get angry anymore. what am I doing this to myself for? When you realize how it feels, a little bit of reflection, sort of looking inside yourself instead of just getting lost in the anger, is enough to stop it after a while. You don't want to feel like this anymore. It's really, really painful and ugly and terribly unpleasant. So things like that is actually what stops you. Because that feeling of anger, that is hell. That's what it's like. And this is like hell in this life. The heaven in this life. You know what that's like. When you've just been really kind to someone, you've done something really good and wonderful. You really have sort of, let someone in front of you. When you're going home, you've been kind, you've been gentle, you've been good. You've forgiven someone who it's really hard to forgive. If you've been really, really kind, you actually feel like you're in heaven. Now, what that does, it means in this life you can get an understanding of what happens to you after you die. What actually is heaven realms? What are hell realms? And one of the things which I realized after so many years of meditating, look, these realms aren't realms which are prefabricated and waiting for you to go in. Just like many people who create their own homes in this life, you create your own heavens and hells. As you do in this life, so you do after you die. This is not pre-created for you. It's not some other being makes these places. You make those places. This is a great difference between Buddhism and many other religions. In the other religion, it's all controlled by a god or an Allah or some supreme being. We don't accept that supreme being in Buddhism. What we accept is we are the creators of our karma. We are the owners of the karma. We make our abidings. Which means, if you've been a really kind and good person, if you've got that happiness, your mind creates happy realms. If you have done something really terrible and bad, then you will create hell realms for you. But please remember this. You created it, which means you can uncreate it. One of the key events where I learned this was when I was visiting Java and visiting a very wonderful monk, Venerable Panyawaro, who lives in Vihara Mendut, just a walk away from the great temple Borobudur. And it's because I was visiting him, he gave me this VIP tour around this beautiful monument in the middle of Java, the ancient temple of Borobudur. And it's got many levels on it, and every level is supposed to be descriptive of the many different levels of existence. And right down the bottom were the hell realms, and there was a carving on there, which really sort of made a great difference to me. The carving was of a man with a razor wheel in his head, turning and turning and turning. And this was the story from the ancient Buddhist texts. There was a man who was very cruel to his mother, and one day even was so violent to her, pushed her over, and so she hit her head. And when he died, according to this story, he went to one of these hell realms, and there he saw this other man who had this razor wheel cutting into his head for 500 years. Total agony without any sort of any intermission. And as soon as this man saw this new guy come, he said, at last, I was told 500 years ago that now another man would come who also heard his mother, and the wheel will leave my head and into yours. And it did. So the first man was free, and this new guy was having to endure the pain of the razor wheel cutting into his head. But this guy, even though he'd heard his mum, was very wise and very kind. He had a moment of compassion, and he thought, it's a terrible thing which I did to hurt my own mum. I wish now to take this wheel for the next 3,000 years. So the next 5 people would follow after me. They don't need to suffer this, I will. I would do this because I don't want them to hurt. And that one thought, the razor wheel shattered, and he got reborn in the heaven realm. That was the story as it was told. What it actually means is that any time that you are in any sort of hellish state, one moment of kindness, one moment of forgiveness, one moment of selflessness is all it takes to take away that terrible, terrible pain. All it means is kindness, compassion. This is the reason why people go to hell realms, either in this life or other realms. We don't learn enough kindness and forgiveness. It's a forgiveness which is so hard for us in our culture. In many, many religions, and forgiveness is just not there. In Buddhism, forgiveness is total, absolute, 100%. You can forgive anything at all. Why? Why not? In Buddhism, whatever you've done, acknowledge it. Bring it up to service. Don't hide it. Don't deny it. Acknowledge it. That's number one. Number two, forgive it. No punishment. And learn from it. That was one of the most beautiful experiences when I first encountered Buddhism, to see there was no punishment there at all. Put aside the rod, put aside the whatever, what it was, the whip or whatever. Everyone fears punishment. Don't do that, said the Buddha in the Dhammapada. No punishment at all. In the monastic code, there's no punishments. When you understood that, you said, what's going on here? And after a while you realize the compassion was so strong, you find out that forgiveness and learning was more than enough to solve the problems of people speaking or acting wrongly in life. We, each one of us, look at your own life. When you've done something wrong, does punishment ever help you? Instead, understand what you did. Acknowledge it, don't deny it. Learn from it. Never put yourself in that situation where you have to act like that again. Have strategies, coping strategies, whatever, so you don't have to be cruel and hurt someone. Learn from it. And that, said the Buddha, is how we grow spiritually. Knowledge, forgiving, learning. You know what we call it here in West Australia? AFL code. AFL, acknowledge, forgive and learn. And that was the heart of the Dharma, heart of Buddhism. That was the container. Sorry, that was the contents. When I saw things like that, I realized, look, you can forgive anything, especially forgive what you've done. What forgiving what you've done, what that really means, is in that story in that book which I wrote, opening the door of your heart to yourself. Whatever I've ever done, including all the bad, terrible stuff, as well as the good stuff, I acknowledge the whole lot. I bring it up. I don't hide anything. Then I forgive it. No punishment, amnesty. And I learn from it. You learn to be a better person. You learn from those mistakes and also from the good things you've done. That is growth. That is so powerful. Whenever I made a mistake in Thailand, Ajahn Chah would never punish me. He'd just laugh. He thought it was so funny how these so-called intelligent people from Cambridge University acted so stupidly. And he only had 4 years at school, and he was so much smarter than I was. So much for Western education. But he would laugh when you did something stupid. A good example, that we go on his arms round without any shoes on. We come back with just cuts and bruises on our feet. And he said, you Westerners have got stupid feet. It's a great way of putting it, because we were thinking all the time on these great sort of theories of Buddhism. We weren't at all mindful of where we were putting our feet. We had stupid feet, and he was absolutely correct. But he would never sort of punish us. He would just teach us. Yeah, acknowledge you've been stupid. Don't punish yourself. Learn from it. Don't do it again. Enough. And that sort of teaching understands what hell and heaven are and the way out of hell. You can make a hell for yourself at any time, and people do. Why? Because it's called guilt, anger, blaming other people, blaming yourself. You know what that feels like? That's hell. You can escape any time just by acknowledging they've made a mistake. You've made a mistake. Please forgive. No punishment. No shouting. No blame. But please, for goodness sake, learn from it. So those of you who are having difficulties in your relationships, stop blaming, for goodness sake. No, you're not perfect. They're not perfect. You make mistakes. So if you're going to keep blaming the other person, you're just going to sort of lose sleep, you're going to feel bad, you're going to lose all that sort of that love, that ability to share with another person. You're ending up going to go and see a divorce lawyer. And it's going to happen again the next relationship you have. You just really don't know how to live with another person. Just blaming, anger, or guilt. Guilt. People are asking me another question about divorce in Buddhism. If it does happen, you are separated, please don't blame your ex-partner. It just didn't work out, that's all. It's impermanent. It's just like that story that Ajahn Chah would hold up a glass. See this glass? He'd say, can you see the crack in it? And now I believe him, I look for the crack, and so I can't see a crack. I thought Ajahn Chah was cracked by saying things like that. And he said, it's microscopic, he said. You can't see it, but it's there, because one day you're going to drop this cup, this glass, and it's going to shatter, or someone's going to kick it, and it's going to break. And a microscopic crack will open up. We call that, it's fragile. He said, because it's got a crack in it, because it's fragile, that's why you have to care for this cup. But when it does break, it's just its nature. But in the meantime, because it's fragile, that's why you have to care. And he said, if it was made out of plastic, you wouldn't need to care for it. It was going to last forever. No need to care. Kick it, throw it around, who cares? It's unbreakable. Because you know relationships are like this cup. Your relationship right now has got a crack in it. A microscopic crack. One day it will open up, your relationship will end. We know that, it's impermanent. But because it's fragile, that is why we care. That's why we put that effort and energy and love into our relationship. Because it is fragile. So when it has broken, you realize, yeah, that was true. It was fragile, it's broken, it's ended. But I gave it my best. No one's to blame, it's just human beings, that's all. Don't feel guilty. Don't feel angry. That's just creating hell at the end of a relationship. Instead, we've given our best. The end of a great concert. The end of a talk. The end of a movie. Oh, it's a great movie. I had a wonderful time. It's finished now. There's always another movie coming next week. So don't get angry and upset and blame. It's no one's fault. It's just life. It's like getting angry when somebody dies. What do you mean getting angry at somebody who dies? Whose fault is it? No one's fault. This is what happens. We live, we die. We come together, we part again. This is the nature of life. We cannot stop it. So don't get angry at life or upset. Anger at death is called grief. It's not necessary. Anger at relationships ending is called blame, either guilt or anger. You're creating hell. You can create a heaven instead. It's in your power. Acknowledge the truth. Forgive. And learn from that relationship. You've grown. You've learned so much. Value and cherish all the learning and growth which has happened between the two of you. Now it's parted, it's over. Go forward. Never linger in the past. The same with the death. When a death happens, it's a beautiful time you've had together. A great concert. It was fragile, you gave your very best. Now it's gone. Move on. Acknowledge the truth. Forgive it. No one's to blame. It's life. And learn from it. There's a beautiful story which I was told by an old monk. It's called The Falling Leaves. It's given so much peace to many people who've experienced the death of someone who was very, very young. He was in a hut in a forest in Thailand when there was a huge storm. Trees were coming down around him. He was so afraid that a tree would come through the roof of his grass hut. He never slept all night. In the morning, the storm had finished. He went out from his hut to look at what was outside. A couple of trees had just missed. A few branches had almost sort of went through his roof, but didn't. He was very lucky to be alive. But what took his attention was not the trees uprooted or the branches. It was the leaves. Most of the leaves lying on the forest floor, old brown leaves. Leaves which had lived a full life on the tree. But amongst those brown leaves were many yellow leaves. Amongst the yellow leaves, some green leaves. He even saw a few young green shoots. You know that really bright green colour, which meant that they'd only shot forth the day before. They too had been torn off the tree and lay dead on the ground. He looked up to see what was left on the tree. Mostly green leaves, obviously. But even though some young green leaves lay dead on the floor, he still saw some curly old brown leaves, still clinging on to the twigs. Curly old brown leaves, they hadn't come off from the storm, they were still there. He smiled just like human beings. When the storms of death come through our community, yeah, they usually pick the old brown leaves. They also pick a few green leaves and young green shoots too. And even though young green shoots, little kids, die, still these old people, 80, 90, 100 years of age, curly old brown leaves, still cling on to the tree. They don't die yet. He realized nothing has gone wrong. There is no great mistake in nature when old people survive while young people die. He realized that this is the nature of the world in which we live, the nature of storms, the nature of life and death. Understanding that gave him peace, not anger. No need to blame anymore. Peace. No need to blame, but to care instead. Caring, kindness, compassion. That's what heaven is like. Blaming and anger, that's hell. And you don't have to go to hell. You make hell. You can make heaven. It's a beautiful thing. This is the great container, the great contents rather, of Buddhism. It's practicing these teachings. So don't just go around bowing and chanting thinking you're going to go to heaven. Don't go giving all your money into the donation box trying to secure your passage by bribery. Have some understanding, some wisdom. It should make sense to you. It doesn't just make sense, it's just so true. And that way, you can actually be a beautiful human being who is kind, who never blames or gets angry, who can actually forgive, rather carrying around sort of the hurt which has been put on you from the past. You can have a beautiful relationship because you know just how to live with another person. It's already cracked, your relationship. So care for it. Really care for it. So the crack doesn't open up for many, 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 many years, even lifetimes. And that way, such wisdom will keep you peaceful, happy, beautiful, awake, in heaven, in this world, and in any other worlds which you may come to. So that is what I'm devoted to, more than anything else. How the Buddha taught, the teachings, the contents. Where is actually inside of all these talks and all of these symbols and all of these practices? What's inside of them? The contents. Understand the contents, be wise to those contents. Then you know what you should really be devoted to. Thank you for listening.